We're glad you've joined us again for another episode of The Last Empire, Ancient Mysteries Reveal the Future. We're in for an incredible journey together as we travel to Pompeii and look at global warnings of the last empire. Now, you know, Pompeii is a fantastic city. It's there in Italy, and the archaeologists have been digging up this city for many years now. But Pompeii was a large city for ancient standards. You know, some of the homes had running water, and these very large homes, in fact. Not only that, but you could come down here to the forum, the marketplace, to begin your day's activities, go to the bankers and so on. Some of you would come down to the wool merchants here to buy some wool to make clothing for your families. Then after that, maybe you want to come down to the bakery to get some bread for the family as well. Some folk, of course, would want to eat food on the run. They had sort of like Macca's in Pompeii, way back there, about 79 AD. You see, the city of Pompeii was destroyed eventually in 79 AD, and they've been excavating this place and finding all of these things that one can see there today. Maybe in the afternoon, after a morning's work of shopping, you would want to come down here to the theatre to watch your favourite actors' live drama they had right here in the city of Pompeii. If you were the more sporty type, you may want to come down here to the sports arena to watch the gladiators do battle to death, because that's the way they did it in the ancient Roman world. An amazing city, a city given to pleasure, to wealth, to luxury. This great city of the Romans there below the city of Rome in Italy. In the evening, you may want to come here to the bathhouse to relax after this hard day's work in town. Other people had other things to do in Pompeii. They discovered the brothels of this place. In fact, someone had scrawled on the walls of one of the homes in Pompeii these words, Sodom and Gomorrah, a city that was given to pleasure and immorality. And archaeologists believe, because of those words, Sodom and Gomorrah, that the Jewish people must have also lived here in Pompeii, because, of course, Sodom and Gomorrah is a story from the Bible. Now, they had their temples, their religion in the great civilization of Pompeii. You needed to have some religion, I guess, so that you would, sort of keep your conscience okay, but not too much lest it spoil your fun. But religion never spoiled people's fun in the ancient world, because they had all sorts of things to go along with their religious beliefs, temple prostitutes and so on. And so Pompeii was a city of wealth and luxury. But always in the background, there was this inactive, sleeping, if you like, volcano. Mount Vesuvius had not erupted for some 700 years, but it was there in the background. In AD 64, Mount Vesuvius began to rumble, and it caused an earthquake which destroyed much of the city of old Pompeii back then. But the people went about, built up their city, and continued life without listening to the warning signs. In AD 79, Mount Vesuvius rumbled yet again, just a few years later. And the people of Pompeii, of course, some of them were concerned, but they went about their business as usual. Life in Pompeii, fun and pleasure and all of the business activities. But then on August the 24th, AD 79, Mount Vesuvius blew its top, and it rained red-hot pumice on the city of Pompeii for 3 days. And it completely buried this ancient city. And as I said, over the last couple of 100 years, archaeologists have been digging up this city and finding the last tragic moments of a city that failed to heed the warning signs. They found those last tragic moments. You know, I want you to come with me to the city of Jerusalem. 2,000 years ago, here on the Mount of Olives, where we're taking this picture from across the city of Jerusalem, 2,000 years ago, on the Mount of Olives, the followers of Jesus came to him and asked him a cryptic question which has everything to do with you and I today in the world that we're living in. They asked him this question, found in Matthew 24, verse 3. Tell us, they said, when will these things be, and what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the world? Notice the question, what are going to be the indicators of the end of the world as we know it? Jesus then proceeded to give his followers some amazing insights or indicators of what the world would be like as we near the end of time. You would think you were reading the world news items from the newspaper or watching the nightly news on television from the descriptions that Jesus left with his followers 2,000 years ago. These predictions show us that we're living on the knife edge of eternity today. We are living in Earth's final hours. In fact, you're going to see that very clearly as we move through this program in our series today. First of all, Jesus spoke about signs in the natural world, signs in the world of nature all around us. I want you to notice what he said. He talked about famines, first of all. He said, Matthew 24, verse 7, there will be famines, talking about the end of the world. You know, today, 24,000 people at least die from hunger every day in our world. You know, that's one every 3.6 seconds. One person is dying from hunger. Another one has just died. Now another has just died. What a shocking statistic, yet Jesus could see down to what the world would be like as it came toward the end. Do you know 500 million people tonight are desperate for a meal just today? 500 million of our fellow human beings. 925 million go to bed hungry every night. Their stomachs are not full at all. Probably only had one meal for the day. 925 million. Do you know the global grain harvest increased by 1.1% each year for a decade recently? Yet, the global population increased by 10% in that same time period. In other words, we're getting more mouths than food to put in those mouths, and that spells disaster, does it not? Which is why Robert McNamara, the former president of the World Bank, said these words. The problem, he said, will be solved by famine, by riot, by insurrection, and by war to get that food. Very true. Our world today in many places is in desperate need of food, and those things spell disaster, of course. You think of earthquakes. Jesus predicted there would be earthquakes as we near the end of time. Notice what he said. There will be earthquakes in various places. And how true that is today when you stop and think about it. You think of the tragic earthquakes in recent times that have taken a lot of lives. Haiti, Christchurch, and Japan with that terrible tsunami that followed the earthquake and so on. Earthquakes are on the increase today, increasing dramatically. You look at these statistics for a moment. For the first 10 years of the 20th century, there were 18 recorded quakes over 6 on the Richter scale. In the last 10 years of the 20th century, there were 42 recorded quakes over 6 on the Richter scale. And in the first 10 years of this new century, the 21st century, there were 217 quakes over 7. We're not even measuring them as 6 anymore. We've gone up to 7 now. They are increasing, there is no question. And the deaths from quakes is increasing dramatically around the world today. You think of these statistics tragically. It took 70 years to reach 25,000 deaths by quakes in our world. It took less than 40 years to reach 50,000 deaths by quakes. And from 1980, just 1980 to 2008, there were nearly 594,000 deaths from earthquakes. Amazing when you think about how deaths tragically are increasing. And 88% of those deaths from quakes were from just the year 1998 to 2008 alone. 88% of them in that last 10-year period. And no question, not only earthquakes, but tsunamis and cyclones and floods were predicted by Jesus Christ as he sat there on the Mount of Olives 2,000 years ago. He said, there will be distress of nations with perplexity. The sea and the waves, he said, would be roaring. And that's exactly describing things like tsunamis as we've seen them. Nations indeed are anxious. They're quite terrified about such events that are taking place in our world today. You think of the ecological crisis that is taking place right around the world today. The book of Revelation actually described that in the end of time, man would be destroying the planet. Notice what John saw in the book of Revelation. He said in Revelation 11:18, the nations were angry, and your wrath has come, and the time of the dead to be judged, and to destroy those who destroy the earth. Now, we're living in an age when man can destroy the planet. Never before have we had that capacity. We couldn't do it with bows and arrows or even with gunpowder, but today we are doing it and can do it in many ways. By the pollution of our water with oil and so on, and we've seen what tragedies can take place, like down in the Gulf of Mexico, when oil spills everywhere, the pollution that is caused. Think of the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, right there in the northern Pacific region. We notice that there's lots of plastic flotsam and jetsam and chemical residues, plastic chemical residues floating around. And the scientists today are worried about that stuff because the fish eat that and we eat the fish. And indeed, scientists and politicians are worried about nuclear conflict. And not just the nuclear conflict, but what happens to all the nuclear waste? What's going to happen when this spills out? What impact is this going to have on our environment? That's why Lester Brown, some years ago now, made a warning. He said, we do not have generations. We have only years in which to attempt to turn things around. No question. Signs in the natural world. Jesus predicted with 100% accuracy, as you can see. He also talked about signs in the political world, signs in the world of politics and military and so on. Jesus said in Matthew 24, verse 6, as he's looking over the mount, from the Mount of Olives over the city of Jerusalem, talking about the indicators of the end, he said, you will hear of wars and rumors of war. Do you know there are 30 wars per year on our planet? Incredible. We spend $100 million on war every hour in our world, the nations of this world. There is 80 times more money is spent on war than is needed to provide water and sanitation to the world. We're spending all of this money just on war. And Jesus predicted there would be strife among the nations. You know, we have 27,000 nuclear bombs in stock today around the world. You could destroy the world many times over with that lot just from nuclear alone. Think about international global conflicts. Jesus predicted those as well. He said these words, nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. He predicted that so long ago. And do you know, the Bible predicts in Revelation, the nations will be angry as we near the end of time. That's exactly what we've been seeing. In the last century, you think about it, 180 million deaths in the last century from war alone. What an incredible prediction 2,000 years ago, and we see it before our very eyes today. 180 million deaths, what a tragic statistic. And of course, nuclear conflict we fear today. And what happens if a terrorist gets their hand on one of these dirty bombs, as we call it? And that's in fact what scientists are worried about and politicians today. What if some terrorist gets their hands on some of this stuff? Terrorists like we've had who would have no fear to blow up the World Trade Center and so on. They're not going to fear at all to blow themselves up. So there's a concern today. Jesus not only spoke about signs in the political world, he talked about signs in the social world. in the world of people and interactions between people. Notice what Jesus predicted. Matthew 24, verse 12, the Bible says, "And because lawlessness will abound, the love of many will grow cold." In other words, love will be in short commodity as we near the end of time. It won't be seen too much around the place. In fact, one of Jesus' friends, a man by the name of Paul, wrote these words also 2,000 years ago when he was writing to one of his friends. He wrote a letter to Timothy. He said these words in his letter. "But know this, that in the last days," so he's talking about the last days here, "perilous or dangerous times will come. For men will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money," he said, "boasters, proud, blasphemous." He went on to say they will be disobedient to their parents, unthankful, unholy, unloving, unforgiving, slanderers, without self-control, brutal, despisers of the good, traitors, headstrong, haughty, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God. And he said, having a form of godliness, but denying its power. You would think you were reading from the newspaper right there, yet that's 2,000 years old. Incredible prediction. You think, let me illustrate it. Here are the top problems in the schools back in the 1940s. Here they are, talking in class, chewing gum, making noise in the schoolrooms, running in the halls, cutting in line, and not wearing your school uniform, and littering. These were the top problems back in the 1940s. Rather serious. We chuckle to ourselves. But what about today, in the 2000s? What are the top problems today? Here they are. Drug use among school kids, alcohol abuse, pregnancy among school kids. Then there's suicide and rape and robbery. This is on the school ground by school kids, and assault on the school grounds. You would think we were on a different planet in just a very short time. How we have moved. Do you know sometimes an 80-year-old woman in our cities today of this country has to have 2 or 3 deadlocks on their door lest an 11 or 12-year-old kid rape them? That's the reality of our world. It's a tragic thing, but that's what's happening. Crime is increasing today. The recorded assaults in Australia increased since 1996 from 623 per 100,000 till 2007 we had 840 per 100,000. Crime is increasing today. It's on the increase, and that's why politicians and law enforcers are concerned. One of the most tragic statistics for our own country here is that in Australia 1 in 6 boys and 1 in 4 girls will be sexually abused before they reach the age of 18. Now that's not love in anybody's estimate, a statistic like that. Jesus was correct, you see. There would be a loveless age as we near the end of time. It would be in short commodity, and these things sadly are increasing today. Jesus spoke about signs in the financial world as well. In the Bible, notice this incredible prediction. John was on the island of Patmos when he wrote this about the end of time. John could see what would be taking place as we near the end. He said in Revelation chapter 18, "And the merchants of the earth will weep, and they will mourn, for no one buys their merchandise anymore. For in 1 hour such great riches come to nothing." John could see that as we near the end of time, there would be a global financial crash. We don't have to be rocket scientists to realize the reality and the possibility of such things. We have been on the brink of financial collapses in the recent times. So these things are a real possibility. In fact, a few years ago we had one. We weren't there, of course. In the 1929s we had the Great Depression. And such things can really happen in our world today, and the Bible said they would be happening. A global financial crash of gigantic proportions, said John in the book of Revelation. And one of the reasons we had the recent GFC in our world, the global financial crisis, was because of human greed. And the biblical prophets predicted that human greed will be the reason for the great global financial crash that's coming. Notice what this man Paul wrote. Come now, I should say James, one of the friends of Jesus, wrote these words. Come now, he said, you rich, weep and howl for your miseries that are coming upon you. Your riches are corrupted. Your gold and silver are corroded. You have heaped up treasure in the last days. Why? He goes on to say, indeed, the wages of the laborers, which you kept back by fraud, cry out. You have lived on the earth in pleasure and luxury. The coming of the Lord is at hand. You see, human greed, said James, is one of the fundamental reasons for the coming crash financially that the world is going to experience as we near the end of time. Jesus also spoke about signs in the religious world as we near the end of time. Notice what he said. He said in Matthew chapter 24, verse 24, for false Christs and false prophets will arise. He said, and they will show great signs and wonders to deceive, if possible, even the elect. Now, you think about that sort of thing that is taking place in the world today. I was running this series of programs in the city of Adelaide just 3 or 4 years ago, and I noticed in the newspaper there, back in 2011, someone claimed to be Jesus. It said in the newspaper here, the Sunday Mail in Adelaide, I'm Jesus, Riverland man says. Would you believe it? Jesus predicted there would be false Christs and false prophets, and even in our day we have such people who claim to be Jesus and other great personages, especially Jesus the Christ. You think about the New Age movement that is sweeping across the world today. When I was a kid growing up in the city of Perth, I remember there was a man by the name of Uri Geller visiting the city of Perth. And he was on the radio and he told people, he said, listen, just pick up a spoon, hold the spoon in your hand. And as people picked up spoons around the city of Perth, in many homes those spoons just bent U-shape. Amazing things taking place around the world today, even in your own city here. The New Age and the occult, witchcraft, this is growing around the world today. You think of signs and wonders in the Christian religion today. This is growing today. In fact, the fastest movement in the Christian world today is the signs and wonders movement. It's growing dramatically. Now, I believe in miracles. I mean, my own father was cured of cancer 50 years before he died, 50 years after he had cancer. I believe in miracles, but I also believe what John wrote in the book of Revelation, talking about these sorts of things that would be taking place among Christians as well as we near the end. John saw 3 beasts come up out of the briny ocean. One of them came out of the ocean, another one from the land. Notice what he says, I saw 3 unclean spirits like frogs. He said they came out of the mouth of the dragon, they came out of the mouth of the beast, and they came out of the mouth of the false prophet. He said they are the spirits of demons performing miracles. Now, many people think that miracles can only come from God. But the Bible predicted that miracles can come from demons. Now, Jesus himself warned about this when he was here on the earth, talking about the end of the world. Notice what Jesus the Christ said. He said, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, who claims to be a believer in him, a Christian, shall enter the kingdom of heaven, but he who does the will of my Father which is in heaven. Many will say to me, have we not prophesied in your name? Haven't we made predictions in your name, Jesus? Haven't we cast out demons in your name? And done many wonders or miracles in your name? And then I will declare to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you who practice lawlessness. So just because we see a miracle, according to the Bible, doesn't mean it's coming from God. And as we near the end of time, there are going to be many miracles and signs and wonders in the world, and even among the Christian world. We are going to see those things according to Jesus in the book of Revelation and in Matthew. One of the great signs that we're nearing the end was also given by Jesus was the spread of the gospel or the good news that God loves every person on this planet. No matter how bad they've been, God cares about all of us. And Jesus predicted this as he looked over the city of Jerusalem from the Mount of Olives. He said, "This gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world as a witness to all the nations, and then the end will come." And notice what he said, the spread, the preaching, the proclamation of the gospel would be going across the world, and then the end would come. You know, Time magazine some years ago made an interesting report on the spread of Christianity. Notice what it says here. Adherents to that faith, Christianity, have more than tripled all across Asia since 1970, jumping from just over 100 million to 350 million today. Time magazine, in one of its reports on the spread of Christianity, said if Christians really believe these words of Jesus that we just read, they would realize that the end is much sooner than they think. And because it then gave a report of how Christianity was spreading, not just in Asia, but around the world. Signs of the spread of the gospel indicate the approaching of the last empire. You think of the former communist USSR. For over 70 years, these people had been denied access to the Bible even. Many of them were put in prison, had to go to Siberia because they believed in a God. But you think of what happened when communism collapsed back in the late 1980s and early 1990s. What did we see? Thousands of people who had been denied access to the Bible and the things of God now found new life, new meaning, new hope in the things of the Bible. They found a new way of life. You come with me to South America, to the Philippines and to Africa. One of the fastest growing places for the spread of the gospel is in Africa today. And in South America, people by the millions are finding a new way of life, a new hope for the future. Many, many people finding peace and a way to live in life. You come to India, which for many years had been the heartland, of course, of Hinduism. Now, today, it is the fastest growing place for Christianity on the world today. Many, many millions of people are finding new life, a new power to live, a new happiness in their life, and a new meaning and purpose in the things of the God and the Bible. So you see signs in various aspects Jesus gave. Global warnings, if you will. Global warnings in the natural world, he predicted 2,000 years ago. Global warnings in the political world. Global warnings in the social world, the world of people. Warnings in the financial world around us. And finally, in the religious world. 5 great areas of indicating of his return and the end of the world as we know it. Now, what do they all mean? What do all these things mean that Jesus the Christ predicted 2,000 years ago on the Mount of Olives and by some of his friends like John on Patmos? Jesus said in Matthew 24 verse 33, when you see all these things, these great indicators, when you see these things happening, he said, know that is the return of Christ, to set up the last empire, know that it is near, even at the doors. That's the first thing he indicated, that these things are indicators that the end is in sight. Now, what should be our reaction to these things? Should we sort of bite our fingernails and be petrified? Well, we should certainly take a reality check on life. We should certainly think about what we're doing in life. But Jesus wanted us to lift up our heads with hope. Notice what he said as he talked to his followers. He said, now, when you see these things begin to happen, he said, look up and lift up your heads. Why? Because your redemption is drawing near. In other words, he was saying, God's last empire is soon to take over. An empire that we saw in our last program with a forever hope, where there is no more tears, where there will be no more pain, where there will be no more sorrow, no more death. That's what we should do. Look up, he said, lift up your heads, because the best is yet to come. And so it was on August 24, AD 79, that the people of Pompeii woke to a new day. Imagine with me what could have taken place on that day in that city. As they rose to a new day of life, the people came down the streets of Pompeii to their business, to their pleasure. Some of them came to do business at the marketplace. Business as usual on that fateful day. Some of them came to Pompeii, to the places where the sports arenas were, where the gladiators fought each other to death. Business as usual, pleasure as usual. Some of them probably came to the psychics who tried to read the patterns, the dust patterns in their bowls and basins, trying to work out what the future would hold. But they couldn't even predict what was going to take place in a couple of hours from their dust patterns in their bowls and basins. And then it happened. Mount Vesuvius blew its top, and it began to rain red-hot pumice on the city of Pompeii. Some of those people tried to flee through these very gates to get outside of the city, but they'd left it too late. And they were caught up in that tragic last moments of Pompeii, as you can see here on the screen. Tragic moments. They tried to leave the gates of that city, but it became their own burial place, and many of those people could not escape the city out of those gates. They perished in Pompeii. The tragedy of failing to listen to the warning signs. And you imagine people coming down here to the bread shop to get some bread. They left it too late. They found the bread 2,000 years later still there at the bread shop, but the people of Pompeii perished. The tragedy of not listening to the warning signs, you see. They're the temples. You can imagine the priests come running back to their temple for some of their special religious relics, their statues and so on. They came running back, but they left it too late, and they too perished in Pompeii. The tragedy of not listening to the warning signs. Would you believe Pansus? Here is his marvelous house. Can you just imagine him racing back to his home for his precious objects of art? But he perished in Pompeii. The tragedy of failing to heed the warning signs, my friend. And all around us today, happening on every level, we have warning signs that Jesus the Christ gave us 2,000 years ago. Are we listening? That's the question, my friend. Are we listening? Are we heeding these warning signs that Jesus the Christ left with us so long ago? I guess in closing, this would be the most important question. How can we be ready for what is about to take place on this world as we know it? How can we be ready? I want to take you back to ancient Babylon, where we were in our last program, to answer that question. You see, King Nebuchadnezzar, we talked about, he had that great dream of the various metals. Now, the biblical writer Daniel gives us a description, really, of what this man was really like as you work through his book. This is what Nebuchadnezzar was like, his character. He was very proud. He was very ambitious. He was super materialistic. Things were very important to him. He was very self-centered as you read the story, and he certainly had no belief in God. Didn't believe in the God of heaven, and he was living just for the now, the moment. That was Nebuchadnezzar. That's how he lived life as the greatest monarch in the world at that time, as he ruled the great city-state of Babylon. Now, actually, archaeology supports that very biblical view that we've just read or mentioned from the book of Daniel. Notice what we find. Archaeologists discovered an interesting tablet, clay tablet. It's called Nebuchadnezzar's tablet, and on it, it says these words: "The fortifications of Esagila and Babylon I strengthened and established the name of my reign forever." This guy's got an ego problem, hasn't he? My reign, my name, I did it all. And that's exactly what Daniel says in his 4th chapter. "Is not this great Babylon, said Nebuchadnezzar, which I have built for my glory, He had an ego problem, as you can appreciate. But not only that, archaeologists discovered a fascinating tablet that you can see on display in the museum today. The British Museum tablet number 34114. It speaks of a time when it seems Nebuchadnezzar lost his mind, evidently. Now, this actually is seen in a chapter that Daniel wrote in the book of Daniel, the 4th chapter again. It tells the story of what happened to Nebuchadnezzar toward the end of his reign. It tells us how Nebuchadnezzar in the 4th chapter had another dream, because dreams, we saw in our previous program, were important to the Babylonians. He dreamt of a dream. When he woke up in the morning, of course, again, because of the Babylonian understanding of dreams, he was deeply disturbed. What did this dream mean? He called in his various advisors, his astrologers, his magicians, to tell him what the dream meant. But they couldn't tell him what the dream meant. Finally, he decided to give Daniel a go again. Daniel, who predicted the one in chapter 2, what it meant, or showed what it meant. Now he tells Daniel this dream. He said, Daniel, I dreamt in my dream of a great big tree. The height of this tree went right up to heaven, and it filled the whole world almost. And the tree was food for the birds and the animals. Everything lived under this tree. He said, and then, as I was watching, suddenly a voice came from the heavens, chop the tree down, cut it down, and just leave the stump in the ground and put a band of iron around the stump. And it'll be like that for 7 years. Well, the king wondered, what does this mean, Daniel? Daniel was deeply disturbed himself. He didn't want to tell the king what that dream meant. But finally the king said, come on, Daniel, what does it mean? I need to know. Daniel said, I wish this dream was about your enemies, king, but it's about you. He said, the God of heaven is showing you that you've become a big, proud, egotistical bloke, big man. You are the shelter for all the nations of the world. You provide everything. And you own everything in the Mediterranean world. But you've become big-headed. It's got to your head, king. And you're living for the now. You're living for the moment. You're living for pleasure. You're living for money. But you've not got much interest in the God of heaven. He said, that's you, king. He said, now, this voice that says, chop the tree down, it means that for 7 years you're going to lose your empire. And you're going to live out in the bush like an animal until you recognize, until you acknowledge that there's a God in heaven who really owns it all. And we are just his children. Well, the king, of course, thanked Daniel for telling him what it meant, though, of course, he didn't really want to know the meaning of it, I guess, after that. And for a whole year, he went on life as usual. 1 complete year later, King Nebuchadnezzar is looking out over this vast city of Babylon and all the things that he's made, and he uttered those words I mentioned a moment ago. He said, is not this great Babylon that I have built by my glory and my might and my power? What a great guy I am. And the Bible says in Daniel chapter 4, at that very moment, a voice came and said, chop the tree down, cut it down. And at that very moment, Nebuchadnezzar lost his mind. And his family and his subjects drove him out of the palace, and he lost his kingship for a 7-year period. He lived like an animal there in the bush. In fact, you know, Daniel had said, that's you, king, as we mentioned. But as King Nebuchadnezzar looked over that palace, over his palace, and heard those words, the very next thing was happened. He became like an animal. And actually, scientists believe that probably he was suffering one or two syndromes which we know well about. Lycanthropy. It's known as the wolf-man syndrome, where a man gets around like a wolf. Or the boanthropy, which means an ox-man syndrome. He gets around like an ox. Nebuchadnezzar lost his sense, in other words, and he was living like an animal for 7 years. Finally, the Bible tells that after 7 years, this once proud monarch, now humbled in the dust, looked up to heaven as if to say, God help me. And the moment he looked up and acknowledged that he needed God's help, it says his sanity returned to him, and he was invited back to the palace, and he became again the ruler of Babylon. And that tablet from that you can see in the British Museum seems to reflect probably this event that's recorded in the Bible. And this king, this once proud monarch, now humbled, acknowledged there was a God in heaven. And he found a forever hope. As he looked up and basically said, God help me, he found a hope that goes beyond the grave. And this man, this once proud monarch, is going to finally be in God's forever last empire. What an amazing thing. And that's how we can have this hope, my friend. Sometime we need to give up on ourselves and we need to put our life in the hand of God and say, God, I need your help. My life is going nowhere. I'm like that old Nebuchadnezzar guy. I'm living for the moment. I'm living for now. I'm living for myself. God, I need your help. And when we do that, let me tell you, a peace comes into our life. We find meaning and purpose in life, and we find a hope for the future like this man did. I think we should pause and thank God for showing us these amazing predictions, but more importantly, how we can be ready for what is about to happen. Shall we bow? Oh God, we thank you for caring enough about us to show us these predictions, these things so long ago. We thank you that the Bible is trustworthy. Its predictions are dependable, and we know we're nearing the end of the world as we know it, and soon the last empire, the forever empire of peace and eternal life, will be set up by God. May today we, as we are watching, decide to put our life in the hands of this God who can change our life, give us meaning and purpose and a hope for the future. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, we're glad that you joined us again in this incredible program, Pompeii and the Global Warnings. Don't miss the next episode in our series when we'll be taking you to Star Wars. You're going to be amazed as we go to the Star Wars battle and the lost city in the sea. I'm also going to be taking you in the next program to the amazing forbidden prophecy. The forbidden prophecy that we find in the book of Daniel. The curse of the forbidden prophecy, the decoding the Da Vinci Code. So you'll want to join us in our next episode at that time.